welcome to this episode of For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. Sam Burton joins the pod and talks to me about leadership, gender and her work with the UK rescue organisation. Normally when I do an interview, Lana would have a listen and do the intro for you, but unfortunately she's not available, so this time it's me. I wanted to talk to Sam because she's worked for West Midlands Fire Service and is now in Shropshire, where she's been confirmed as Deputy Chief. Both of these services have been through troubled times, and we have written a lot about that in Emergency Services Times. I asked Sam what she's learned from these experiences and how it has affected her leadership style. As a female Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Sam is unusual. We still only have a handful of women who are chiefs, and talk about what can be done to encourage women to move into leadership positions when they only make up 10% of the total number of frontline firefighters. She also opens up about her own neurodiversity and how she has unleashed what she calls her superpower to help her flourish. We talk about her work with the UK Rescue Organisation and the importance of training and learning from research to improve frontline response. Signing off with some reflections on the 2022 Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, she shares her thoughts on what others can learn about effective preparation for major events like this one. It's a wide-ranging interview where you may hear some rustling in the first 5 minutes because, in a first for this podcast, we're interrupted by her tortoise munching too loudly, and with him moved to a different room, we carry on. So, sit back and enjoy as I get into the detail with Sam. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Burton, who is the Deputy Chief Fire Officer for Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service. Welcome to you, Sam.
Hi, Catherine. How are you doing?
All right. I'm very, very pleased to see you today and to have our chat. You've had such a varied career, and I still have the joyful photo of you and the Commonwealth Games in my head from all those years ago when you were celebrating Birmingham being the home of the Commonwealth Games. And then you were with West Midlands Fire Service, but you've had quite a varied career. So I think before we get going, and for people who don't know much about your career and where you've been, could you give us a little bit about your career, where you've how you've come to this level, and then we'll sort of talk a little bit after that about leadership and gender and some of the issues that you're facing. So let's hear a little bit about you first.
So, Catherine, I joined West Midlands Fire Service in 2001, didn't really understand what the role of a firefighter was, didn't really understand what I'd be doing when I joined the fire service, but quickly did through my basic training. And I was posted to Highgate Fire Station in the centre of Birmingham, where I quickly learnt the skills of the trade and how diverse communities kind of work and come together and the challenges that are faced within those communities. I then wanted to seek promotion, wanted to be able to, influence in my way in terms of the watch and what we were doing in the community. So I took a role as LF at the time. It was crew commander now at Ward End Fire Station, another busy station in a really diverse community. And what that challenged me in was being a woman in the role of an officer was challenging within the communities I was serving, and it was breaking down those barriers. So that was quite a prominent kind of point in my career. What I did then was I went into a number of roles in the fire service. Was a recruit instructor at training school, and I really loved that role. I've been an instructor throughout my life in various different things outside of the fire service, but that really kind of drew on my skill set around coaching and teaching and learning. I've done fire investigation, I've worked in community safety, I've done all operational roles. And then I took the big step to leave operations as an operational officer into response. So my first job, not on the fire engines, and that got me into understanding how the mechanisms of the service work, some of the challenges that were faced around the time when we were making significant cuts, and so really started to understand underneath the skin of the service. I then took a role in CRMP as the community risk manager, that was a really challenging role for me. And I think my natural skill set wasn't around understanding things in great detail, and that role really required that. So I developed quickly in using data and analysis to understand where our risk profile was and how then we can support our leaders to, you know, develop those deployment measures. So I think another prominent kind of feature in my career was when COVID came, I just took on the role of head of protection and as an area manager, and into the kind of thick of managing and dealing with COVID and being a leader in protection was a challenge for me, because I hadn't had any skills in protection or fire safety. So again, developing a different set of leadership skills, which then set me to lead with Karen Gary-Sunker as head of operations for West Midlands Fire Service. So Karen and I both led operations across all of the stations in West Midlands, and that was quite a pivotal moment in my career for Karen. And for Karen, I would say, not speaking on her behalf, but it was a real time where having both Karen and I leading operations just prior to our inspection was really important. It's been a milestone in my career. I then led people and development before I then took the role as a seconded role into Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service as a seconded ACFO. And I was there for about 7 or 8 months leading corporate services. Totally new experience for me, working in a predominantly on-call service. Again, looking at how we apply our risk management methodologies into, you know, a different set of risks as well, different service, different kind of risk profile. I then came back from Oxfordshire and then very quickly went to Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service, where I've been in the role of DCFO for just coming up to 12 months now. So from start to finish, like lots of different roles there.
Yes, interesting. So can I just ask you on the Oxfordshire point, how does an officer move from one service to another for a short period of time? What is the process of that? So
in terms of the opportunity to go for a secondment, so I had the opportunity to go for that secondment through a selection process with a few other people. And I think having the opportunity to do that, coming from a whole-time service, going into an on-call kind of situation and service, really made me look at things very differently, and it really broadened my skill set. So I really grasped that, because it was just enabled me to apply the same things that I did in a whole-time service into an on-call, and the challenges that the on-call service faces. And now in Shropshire, I can really see some of the barriers and challenges that on-call services have. So yeah, it was a great opportunity, and I would encourage anybody to do that if they do get the opportunity to broaden their skills and understanding.
Yes, and also a different governance model. So you are in the county council when you were at Oxfordshire. Yeah. So did you learn anything there in terms of the politics side of things?
Yeah, I think we were at the time in Oxfordshire where we were reviewing the operating model and having to, go into the county council environment where there are other competing priorities in terms of finance as well, and how it is governed really challenges from a different perspective, where you've got that fire authority model, which is kind of quite, hierarchical, where the county council is broader and you are part of a broader agenda. And with that comes additional challenges in terms of funding, because you're part of that. If savings need to be made, you're really part of those, you're part of the organisation that needs to make those savings as well. So it is very different. And it opened my eyes to, again, a different governance model.
So it's interesting that you worked in Oxfordshire and you've learned those different politics, because all these different fire governance models have these different nuances. It makes me want to talk to you about what happened in West Midlands. So we have the unfortunate death of Wayne Brown in January 2024, and all the subsequent issues we saw around the governance, around the leadership, and a lot of very public I want to say fallout, but it's just that what's happened in West Midlands is very publicly played out. And whilst we're not going to go into the detail of that in terms of what you've learnt from being in an organisation that's going through difficult times, what it means to be in the thick of it. And I just wondered if you could tell us what that's meant in terms of what you've learnt for your leadership style as you've gone forward into Shropshire. So perhaps if you could expand on that for us.
Yeah, and it's absolutely right to say that it's a real tragedy that someone feels they get to a place, then they take their own life. And I wasn't in West Midlands Fire Service at the time. And like you said, I also saw it play out in social media and on the news. From a leadership perspective, you know, I understand and acknowledge that we live a life in that we're publicly accountable. And we are held to account by the public through our governance model, and at times that can be intense. You know, I joined Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service in June last year. I was invited to go there when those events were ongoing, and it's not my place to talk about that, and that has been concluded by an investigation. But I think it is, you know, my role was there to lead the service during that time, and I did that until the Chief Fire Officer returned. You know, I've been there just over 12 months, and since June last year, you know, Shropshire has made great strides, and, you know, absolutely couldn't have done this by myself, thanks to Karen Gary-Sunker and Jason Kirby, who stepped in at the time when I went there. And also the senior management team were going through, you know, some significant challenges, but they accepted me and supported me. And you can't do this on your own. In that environment, you have to have a really strong and good team around you. You know, I'm really proud to say I'm able to champion those core values and the behaviours expected of me now in the role as the DCFO. So I think when you ask me around what that's kind of impacted on my leadership journey, I've had a significant journey in my leadership over the last 5 years, and focusing on my time in Shropshire, it was about being prepared to make decisions whilst learning about the service. And that seems really obvious, but I didn't really understand Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service. And I arrived a couple of weeks prior to the inspection, which did in many ways take a priority for me. And looking back on it now, it can become quite all-consuming what you're dealing with. You're dealing with many challenges, and you have to be mindful that that can become all-consuming. And, you know, I'm open to say it's been a real roller coaster for me from that period of time. There's been periods of great confidence, but periods of real lows. There's been periods of, you know, I'm increased vulnerability for me, but then drawing on lots of resilience. So, yeah, it has been a roller coaster journey, and that my leadership has ebbed and flowed with that as well.
Okay, let's just explore that a little bit. So just to be clear for people listening to this, that in June 24, you moved from your secondment to Oxfordshire to Shropshire. You didn't go back to West Midlands in the middle of that. Is that right?
Yeah, I did for about a kind of 8 to 10 weeks. I think it was March, and then I joined Shropshire in end of March and June time. So yeah, I had a couple of months, 3 months where I went back to West Midlands, and then I went to Shropshire. Yeah. Just
to be clear on that. And then in terms of your being in Shropshire, what people may not be aware of is the suspension of the chief and the, I want to say deputy chief, might be assistant chief for issues around the use of WhatsApp and an investigation, which, as you said, led to the chief returning and the AC resigning. Can't remember which one it was. Leaving the service. Yeah. So you've been in a service which was going through trauma. You've gone off. You've then come back briefly, and then you're going into Shropshire, which has its own different challenges going on. You're right in the thick of it. So explaining it as a roller coaster seems like the very apt term to use. So how do you cope with that? What is that personal resilience that gets you through that? You mentioned resilience just now and the ebbs and flows, but how do you get through it? Because when you're seeing all this stuff being written about your service and about your colleagues from your old service, it's hard not to get sucked into it. So how do you become resilient, and how do you sort of move on?
Yeah, and we talk about resilience a lot, don't we? And we all show it in different ways, personally and professionally. And I think I had to really draw and understand what my leadership style was. I had to I've had a career where I really have a natural energy to create ideas, to improve. And that served me really well over the years, you know, in terms of all the roles that I kind of described there. But progressing into this leadership role at the very top of the service, I've had to develop a different set of tactics. But I've done that through coaching. I've done it through analytics, which then enables me to understand myself better. And I've been able to develop those skills. But I think what I've learned is it's about, I want to jump in, I want to have those ideas, but this for me now is about allowing others to have those ideas, others to be the first to create the ideas, what they want to develop and how they want to take things forward. So what I've learned about my leadership is about being in the moment. And when I talked about being all consuming, when you're with people and they're talking, it is about being there in every sense, all your senses open, and really investing in that moment. And it's about being visible. And that really sounds obvious, and we talk about really active listening. But for me, that takes control. I know that about myself, and I've had to understand that, because people want you to listen. They want you to be there. And, I've had to develop skills to show that patience and to create that trusting environment. So that's what I've learned over the last 12 months, because I've had the opportunity to flourish in the roles that I've been in. That's why my career is so varied. I've had that opportunity and I've really benefited from that. I've also had times where I haven't been able to flourish, and I want to create that environment for everybody to have the opportunity to flourish, because I know what a benefit that is to individuals, but also to what you're trying to do. So being in the moment is the real thing that I've took on board.
Yes, that's interesting. I like that use of the word flourish there, because that suggests that you're bringing others with you. That visibility that you described suggests that perhaps you're going out to fire stations, you're not just stuck in your office wherever your headquarters is. So I think that's quite it's really nice to hear that from a leader. Do you find that because you're you have that mix of virtual and office working that makes it difficult to do that? Or as an organisation are pretty much people back in the office, and obviously fire stations have always been fire stations, but on the non-operational side, are you seeing everybody every day, or are they still at home?
I think we offer, in Shropshire, a blend of that, and I predominantly go into work, but I do work from various locations as well, because that visibility piece is really important. But visibility is not just about being present in a place or location. It is about being visible in many ways, whether that's through use of technology or actually physically being around. So we operate a blend of that, and for me, it's where I need to be to add the most value, whether that's a face-to-face conversation, a virtual or a digital, and it's choosing that what suits me but also suits the teams and the services. So it's very much that blended approach for us at the moment.
Yes, okay, so let's move on to talk about the fact that you are one of the very few female deputy chief fire officers. I did a little bit of a count, and there are currently 5 women chiefs in England. That number varies depending on who's gone, between 5 and 8, but never gets much above that. I also looked at the government statistics and the latest data for women across fire and rescue services. This is just England. So latest data showing 10.1% of whole-time firefighters are women, which I think is a slight increase. And then when you add them all up with the on-call, where it's 7.9%, overall we're just under 10%, with 9.3%. So you talked quite glowingly about your relationship with Karen earlier, who's also from West Midlands, and how she's come with you. You are now both in Shropshire together, I believe. And I just wondered about that relationship between working with other women in order to, build the profile for others to see that that's possible. But what is it that you've learned over the years in terms of a woman being in service, where when you joined, people didn't really see many women in uniform, and how maybe the community didn't want to see women in uniform either. So what is it you've learned over the years to kind of get you through that to this level so that you can now inspire others?
Yeah, and I think, just recognising that Karen is with me in Shropshire on a secondment has provided, has brought a unique set of skills into Shropshire in order to make the change that we're, progressing over the last 12 months. And I think that really championing women to do different roles and really embrace their own skills is where I use any platform I can to do that. You know, part of doing this podcast with you is to demonstrate to other women and other people that you can do something different. And I think championing that, I haven't always had women who champion me. And, you know, very early on in my career, you know, it's fair to say, I had actually another woman come up to me and say, why do you want to go for promotion? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to put your head above the parapet? And I was like, because I've got something to offer. But how are we've got to champion each other. We have to build that network of people. And in the roles that I've done, I've tried to do that. And now in this role, bringing together women, you know, is part of what I do. It's part of my role is to be that real model. And, you know, these are words that we've used for a long time, but it's absolutely right, isn't it? That we champion people who bring difference. And that's just not what you can see. That's who you are as well. So I think we've still got steps to go in how we do that, and people don't always have the best experiences, and that's quite sad. You know, I was listening to the radio the other day, and the presenter was talking to interviewing someone, and it was a quite high profile woman had taken a quite high job in the Home Office, and the question was, now, has she got the job because she's a woman, or is she the right person? And I was absolutely gobsmacked to hear that as the starting opening line, and that's already putting us on the back foot. So we need to educate ourselves as well. So in terms of myself and what I would advise I would give and how I would you know, share my approach is, you've got to be really honest with yourself. You've got to be honest with yourself about what you want to achieve, and this can be applied to anybody, but you don't have to share what you want to achieve. You don't have to share your kind of hidden drive to be the X, Y, or Z, but just be really honest with yourself, because unless you're honest with yourself, you won't know the plan you need to put in place to get there. But really importantly, the barriers that are in place. And some of those barriers are perceptions. I've had perceptions, you know, I can't do this, but I'm going to give it a go. And they're internal perceptions, but there is also some realities about the barriers that women have to break down. So I think be really honest with yourself so you can develop that clear plan of how you want to get there. And then just kind of, just go for it, really.
Yes, it's interesting, that idea of just going for it and being confident enough to put yourself forward. Just, I think, is often the issue that women have, is that assertiveness, that willingness to put themselves forward. I mean, I was at a conference just recently where I spoke to a lady who'd been speaking on the stage, saying, "Would you come and speak at the show?" And she was like, I'd offered her this most amazing thing, but she was like amazed I was asking her. And that's that lack of confidence. And I don't know why that happens, but you do see it. I wonder, in terms of thinking about women coming through now, whether the culture reviews that we see coming out both from HMI and individual services doing them, do you think those are making a difference, because they're shining a spotlight on behaviours and conduct, and not just about gender, but all different aspects of how people are? Do you think that presents a space where women can now really start to shine and come through? Will it make a difference?
Well, you know, thinking about that and thinking about the recommendations that as a sector we've had to kind of work our way through over a number of years, you know, let's you know, be honest, it's been a number of years, does it create the platform for women and people who are underrepresented? My honest answer here is I don't think it is changing that much. We've got to actually deliver. We've got to think differently, and we've got to believe in what we're doing. And, you know, this is, you know, my view. We can make the recommendations, and we should make the recommendations for change, but actually, how are we then applying them? And what are the small things that we do on a daily basis that create the environment for that sustainable change? So we're creating big change in terms of the recommendations and how we're progressing policies, procedures. We're doing all that, and we do that really well. How are we making those small changes on a daily basis that amount to giving people the confidence and the safe environment to put themselves forward, to feel championed, to then want to strive for that next level. I think that's where we need to focus our individually we need to focus on, and then kind of collectively as teams and organisations.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the Emergency Services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
When I listened to Lana talking to Alex Woodman about his leadership in Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service for an earlier podcast episode, he talked about doing the small things well. And it's interesting you referenced that as well.
Yeah.
You also talked about thinking differently. And I wonder if I could move us on now to talk about neurodiversity. You were keen, I know, to talk to me about your recent discovery of your own neurodiversity and the sort of difference that's making to the way that you work. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and being diagnosed with being neurodivergent was not a surprise to me, because throughout my life I've had feedback from families, from schools going, she really tries really hard, she doesn't quite get there, really struggles with this, really struggles with that, but excels in all of these really creative areas. So it wasn't a surprise to me. But when I got when I went for my diagnosis, it was through a senior management team development session that we were doing with an external kind of company around neurodiversity to build our understanding. And it was during COVID, so it was on Teams, and I suddenly found myself getting really emotional while we were talking about neurodiversity. And the previous year I'd gone through some light touch assessments with my son at school, and as a parent, that is an emotional place to go. And I think my senses were all heightened around dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. And I got really emotional and I had to turn my screen off, and I was kind of trying to, what's triggered this? So I had a chat with the facilitator at the end and decided to go for an assessment, which I was absolutely supported by the organisation to do that. Fully supported. And I was diagnosed, I was 44 at the time, so a couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with dyslexia, but with traits of ADHD. And I have to say, I really enjoyed the process. Going through that assessment process was quite fascinating to understand yourself. And what that's done is it had a positive impact on me, but it also, I don't know whether it had a negative impact on me in the way that I started to overanalyze myself. Excuse me. I started to overanalyze myself. And I think, I had to take a time to sit back and think, how has this shaped me in the past? Because I've always been dyslexic, and maybe the traits of ADHD have always been there, but how has that shaped my past? So how do I use that now as my kind of superpower moving forward? And I remember, taking feedback from someone at work when I was in a particular role that I wasn't necessarily enjoying. It was quite intense. And I struggled a little bit, and I struggled because I was trying to be somebody different in that role. And they said to me, you're like a round peg in a square hole. And at first I was quite offended by the analogy that I didn't fit, because I was trying my hardest. This was quite a senior leadership role. And I now look back and think, well, actually, I was a round peg in a square hole, and that is brilliant, because those gaps around that round peg in that square hole enable creativity, and that's where I excel. So I then said, well, that's okay. I relaxed into it. I understood myself, and then I did, I absolutely enjoyed that role. So I think it was challenging at the time. I haven't always been confident to talk about being dyslexic, and there was times where I wouldn't put it on my application form if I was applying for a role or externally, because I felt really conscious of that. And it's only recently that I've put it on there, and I've been allowed the reasonable adjustments to be able for me to excel in those processes. And I want to give people the confidence. That's okay. Be confident to do that. And yeah, and services and organisations to really champion that. And that's what I try and do. So where I get the chance to talk around neurodiversity, I absolutely want to do that, because I want people to see it is possible. It is challenging, but there's lots of support out there in services. I've always been supported by my service. Shropshire do a fantastic amount of work around neurodiversity, and I feel fully supported. So it's just giving people the confidence to do the same.
That's really good to hear. And I love the fact that you've embraced your superpower. It's a wonderful way of describing it. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's very difficult for people to talk about what makes them embracing their difference, and what you've described to us, and the way that the organisations have responded and supported and allowed you to flourish. So this is a really good story. And I wonder, as we move on to talk about the other thing we're going to talk about in this interview, which was UKRO, the UK Rescue Organisation, whether you're using your superpower in the leadership there. So could you just tell us a little bit about UKRO, your role there, and what it is you'd like our listeners today to hear about what you've been doing to improve the way that fire and rescue services are doing their rescues when it comes to car crashes and other things where you're using those skills?
Yeah, and I think my role in UKRO as Head of Strategic Planning and National Events really enables me to use my creativity and different way of thinking. So I took on that role and probably last year sometime, so I'm new in the role. And I was the lead for the host in West Midlands, as you said, in 2022, just after the Commonwealth Games. UKRO was hosted in the West Mids, and it really enabled me to see the fantastic work that UKRO do and the impact that they have nationally. And UKRO is absolutely committed to developing technical rescue and that professional development for emergency responders, and we're starting to branch that out further, working with research organisations and academics to further develop what UKRO does, so it stays absolutely up front and centre of developing rescue techniques. We've also got the World Rescue Organisation, and UKRO is part of this global network as well, which not only progresses it, in the UK, but also it's about improving standards and saving lives worldwide. So UKRO really branches into many areas. One of the things that we're really proud of in UKRO is the Academy, and the approach the Academy takes to providing that portal of academic research, training resources, CPD information that brings that knowledge to all fire rescue services should they want to. It's also mapped against national operational guidance, so that's really important to mention, and it's really rooted in the best principles ensuring consistency, safety and excellence. So I think UKRO is building a more capable and connected and forward-thinking rescue sector, and that's done through collaboration. And I talked about industry, research and professionals really coming together, and then how does UKRO then take all that on board and then share that in the right way with UK Fire Rescue Services. So there's a lot going on this year. We've started to develop a range of CPD events because we're not hosting a national challenge this year as we have done previously. We're taking time to develop these CPD events across the country and into Scotland as well. And we are using the wonderful skills of our instructors to bring real kind of focused development CPD sessions to fire and rescue services. So yeah, it's a different way of doing it this year, but we look to bring the challenge again next year as well, because we know that is really important to the UK Fire and Rescue Service.
Yes, I've been to the challenge before. It was in Hampshire, and I was always quite taken by the ginormous fake horse and the way that that's rescued out of a ditch.
Yes.
So it's not
Yeah.
all about cars. It's interesting that there is no exercise this year. It's unfortunate, but at the Emergency Services Show, we'll have an extrication challenge there. So that'll be a chance for West Midlands Fire Service to show their skills to our visitors. And I recently attended a multi-agency exercise myself in Cardiff, where crews practiced extrication from cars. And we're using new techniques which had come out from the research you talked about, the link with academics and the academy. So it's interesting talking about the academy. Do you know how many fire and rescue services have signed up to that now in terms of using the amazing resources which I've seen demonstrated?
Catherine, if I'm honest, I don't have that number on, the top of my head. We have a number of fire and rescue services signed up, and it's something we are absolutely encouraging fire and rescue services to do. There's a small fee attached with that, but it does really unlock a phenomenal amount of work that can, and literature and scenario planning that can be used in-house. So absolutely, you can go onto the website, see what it is. As I say, it's a small fee, but it really does support fire and rescue services aligned to national guidance as well.
Yes, okay. And I think we had a webinar possibly about a month ago where we talked about all of this. So if people want to find out more, to watch that, I'll put that in the show notes for this episode. So that just leaves us to come on just to the last topic, which is around the legacy from the Commonwealth Games. You made that nice link just now between the timing of the UKRO exercise and the Commonwealth Games in 2022. Huge endeavour, lots of partnership working, and a real sense of emphasising public safety and the need to think about risk. I wondered now, reflecting on that 3 years later, what advice would you give for any chief now who has to prepare for such a major event in their area?
Oh, so if I was giving somebody the advice if they were hosting it, I would, or a similar type event, I would say use the evidence to develop less traditional approaches, use methodology, look at what your risk profile is and what's the best way to use those resources. And it's not always what you think it is in our more traditional operational model approach. So Commonwealth Games for us was very much about managing the risk in our communities, because the sites that were being used, the venues were built to be safe. So actually, where did we need to deploy our resources to? And we flipped it on its head. Rather than resourcing all of the venues, we looked at ensuring our risk areas within our communities were focused on. And that enabled us to do things in a different way. And that brings me on to the second point, which is a real legacy of the Games for West Midlands Fire Service, was that in order to do a different approach, you need to bring in the widest set of people with the widest set of skills. We used a model that enabled our non-operational staff to support venues and the operational response with our operational officers, because our support staff have fantastic skills that can be deployed in a different way. And it's choosing to take that brave approach to looking at all of the skills across your service and deploying them in the right way. That legacy means that we've had people in West Mids, when I was there, decide to take on different roles and apply for different roles because they've seen they can do it. And it is that really broad collaboration within the service that enabled us to put on a different operating model. So I think that for me was the real take home, is use all the skills of your service and your teams.
Yes, that's really interesting to think about the service as the totality. It's not just about the front line. It's not just about perhaps the senior leadership, but giving everybody an opportunity to try something new and to get involved. And it did look amazing. So I do remember the photographs very well. So anybody listening can go back and see if you can find some stuff about Commonwealth Games and see what it all looked like. So that just brings me on to my last question for you, Sam, which is to ask you for a piece of advice for our podcast listeners. We ask everybody to think about what is the one thing that once we finish talking, they should go away and talk to somebody else about, have a bit of think about, So we've had quite a wide-ranging discussion, and it's very interesting to hear about your career. But what is that piece of advice you'd give our listeners?
I think the piece of advice I'd give to the listeners is leadership at any level can be tough. We're held to account, absolutely, and we should really respect that, and we should kind of cherish that. And it can be tough, but be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself as a starter, but also be brave to do things differently. I think, over my career, I have done things differently, and it has been challenging, but do things differently and really be that change.
Yes, being kind to yourself. What great advice. Thank you very much for that, Sam. What a fascinating interview. Thank you very much for spending time with me today. I hope that you will join us at the Emergency Services in September. Even though you're in Shropshire now, you're still very, very welcome, and hopefully lots of your team will come along too. So thanks very much for joining me, Sam.
No problem. Thanks. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Tom St. John for expertly producing this episode. If you like this episode, then be sure to check out other conversations with leaders in this season of For Every Response, sponsored by MSA Safety. Share the link and subscribe to receive updates on new episodes from us here at Emergency Services Times.